Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to Evoke Therapy Programs broadcast. I'm Dr. Brad Reedy. Today is Tuesday, January 3rd, 2023. Happy New Year. Tonight's format, for those of you that might be new, is an open question and answer. So, any question you have, anything you want to share with me, please feel free to share throughout the broadcast. Sarah, who'll be moderating for me this evening, will share those questions in the order that they're received. We have 3 pre submitted questions. You can always send in questions, comments, requests, suggestions to webinar@evoketherapy.com. Before I get into the first few topics that I'm going to be discussing tonight, I just want to highlight something. During the pandemic, we have our Finding You program where we bring folks into Utah into a bed and breakfast that we have, and we host an experiential workshop. We look at family of origin, we look at background, we have private intensives. And when the pandemic came, of course, we wanted to offer something online. So we decided to try to offer Finding You online. I will tell you, I was very skeptical. Even the very first one, I didn't even want to charge very much at all because I wasn't sure that you could really get the kind of depth and richness of a therapeutic experiential process like you get in our in-person Finding You. And the minute it was over, I said to my co-facilitator, I said, we've got to do these. These are fantastic. I was so surprised at how similar it felt. And there were even a couple of advantages to it. So our online Finding You offering is an option that is half the time, about a third of the cost. And it does, of course, you don't have to travel. It goes from a Friday to a Sunday. So most of it over a weekend. So if you're limited with your resources and you want to have a therapy accelerator, a therapy springboard, online Finding You is an excellent option. In January 27th through 29th, we have two very experienced therapist women that are going to be running the program. So if you're interested, there are a couple of spots left on our January, and I wanted to highlight that offering tonight. It's something that we'll continue to do long after any worries of the pandemic. So let me get into a couple of topics. What I like to do to start off these question and answer is share a couple of posts or thoughts that I've been having over the past week or so, especially if it's come. Some of my writing has come with some questions. So I'm going to share 3 posts with you before I get to the pre-submitted questions and your live questions. I wrote this, and this is not unique. This is not an idea that I simply came up with from myself. I was drawing from a few different experts that I really respect in the psychotherapeutic field. I wrote, I can't teach you anything that you don't already know. The therapist merely evokes or reminds clients of wisdom lost or forgotten. And some people were saying, well, I wasn't taught, cognitive behavioral skills. I wasn't taught certain skills and tools. So I need to be taught that. And of course, there's some poetic license with this quote. But what I've learned is the real core elements of transformation are inside of you already. And while you might not have access to some of the tools and skills, really the idea here is that when we were young, before we were conditioned by our culture, by our parents, our siblings, teachers, the media, before we were conditioned about what was right and wrong and how we should be, that we had the truth inside of us. In fact, what I wanted to say to one of the folks, I let it sit there, was that while those skills might be something you didn't know, you really wouldn't need them if the process growing up was about just becoming yourself, being who you are. Those therapeutic ideas, therapeutic techniques and tools are something that happens to you after you've been injured, after you've been conditioned or programmed a certain way. So part of what I've noticed as I write, as I teach, is that I'm trying to connect with the part of you that knows, the part of you that knows something that I'm relating to, that I'm telling a story about. If I can get you in touch with that, if you can make a connection to that part of you, that's where the lasting fundamental transformation occurs. And it's true of every age. That's what happens in the wilderness. What happens with young people is you're talking to them, but you're trying to find the truth behind the defense, behind the wounds, behind the scars, behind the fears, the shame, and the guilt. You're trying to connect back to those. And when you can do that effectively, when you can draw out, that's where the name evoke comes from. When you can draw out from people the wisdom that is lost or hidden inside, you find it to be a rapturous experience for both the teacher, the therapist, and for the client or the student. The second post that I made over the past couple of weeks that I haven't discussed yet on one of these broadcasts is this one. It says, inner child work is less about talking or lecturing to your inner child and more about embodying your inner child. Reparative experiences come when you access and communicate deep lost feelings with someone who can hold you the way a nurturing, capable parent would. So let me explain this one. I hear a lot of discussion. It happens at our program a lot. A lot of therapists, a lot of folks are talking about inner child work. There's this mental construct, this idea that there's a version of ourselves, right? The feelings, the sensations, the thoughts, the ideas, the fears, the joys of our childhood that we can connect to that person. It's really a thought experiment, right? Going back in time and imagining yourself. What I have found in my work with at the intensive program is that the great wisdom appears when the child themselves is talking, when the client is able to embody in the inner child. When a client says to me, and this is true not just of our adult intensive clients, but also true of the young people that are in our program. When somebody says to me, I know I shouldn't think this way, but, or I know I shouldn't say this, or I know this is the wrong thing, but, and then they reveal a truth, a powerful truth. That's the moment that you can connect to. That's the moment when you have the opportunity as a psychotherapist in responding in a different way than people have in the past. I'm writing a new book on attachment-based therapy. And one of the main ideas is that the kind of therapy we do at Evoke, attachment-based therapy, is not about attachment styles, right? We're not talking about insecure attachment, ambivalent attachment, secure attachment, disorganized attachment, although that's a tiny part of the discussion. We're talking about creating a reparative experience. So when a client can come to me not knowing, scared, hurt, ashamed, when they can speak a truth that they've been taught not to feel or think or embody, when they can trust. I've said this for years. We talk a lot about how much we trust or don't our children or our adolescent or young adult clients, but really in psychotherapy, the emphasis is on can they trust us? And if we react with anger, disappointment, frustration, exhaustion, anxiety, fear, if we respond with those things, the child has the experience at an unconscious level that something's wrong with them. That is why when a client comes to us in any of our programming and they show skepticism or distrust of us, of the process, the reaction that I train therapists to respond with is, of course. Of course you don't have experience that telling these things is going to be a safe thing, that you're going to have a safe response to it. But if you can take the risk and speak some truth, and I don't respond with fear, frustration, anger, disappointment, then you can start to enlarge yourself. You can start to become more of yourself. Yes, there are concepts, ideas, behaviors that are problematic. There are, as the poet Khalil Gibran says, that even the most thirsty person will drink from dead or poisoned waters. We know that that's true. That's why we have a program. That's why we have a mental health crisis in our country, in the world. But when we can connect to the need, the hole, the wound that the behavior is trying to medicate, to distract from, that's when the real healing occurs. So the method at Evoke, the method of attachment-based therapy is how you respond to the client. Can you respond with patience, understanding, compassion, non-judgment, curiosity? And if you can contain yourself, then you can respond that way, because that's the moment of transformation when the child shows up, even if it's in the person of an old person like myself. When the child shows up, we have the opportunity to create a different kind of experience. And folks, I can't emphasize this enough. Attachment-based therapy teaches that healing happens in the same way that the injury occurred in the first place by experiencing ourselves in the presence of another person. That is the essence of attachment-based therapy, or what I like to call just therapy, psychotherapy. And while we are, of course, an experiential program, in all of our program, we utilize various experiences because it draws more material up from the unconscious, more so than just talk therapy. I must emphasize that talk therapy itself is experiential. And if therapists don't know that, then they don't understand the concept of psychotherapy at its deepest and simplest level, which is to create a reparative experience with a client, something that they haven't experienced before on a consistent basis. And that's where the healing comes. And that's why we spend so much time coaching and nurturing parents. We try to create the same kind of reparative experience for the parent, ideally. Show the same compassion and non-judgment, love and patience and curiosity with all of our parents that we do with our students. But to do that, you have to do some of your own work. You have to get past the shame and the guilt. You have to get outside of, like Khalil Gibran says, outside of, or Rumi says, outside of the field of right and wrongdoing. Like Rumi said, that's the field where we will meet you. We will meet you there. So that's what this is really talking about, is that the real magic is that moment when somebody tells you something that they expect you to be defensive about, upset about, judgmental about, and you have the opportunity in that moment to respond differently. That's the magic. That's the pixie dust. And lastly, before I go to the pre-submitted questions and then to your live questions from this evening, I wrote this. I wrote, the greatest barrier to healing is the pace. There are exciting epiphanies along the way, but deep and lasting transformation comes in small, slow steps over a long period of time. In my experience, that's the biggest barrier. And that's why the skill of a therapist at giving you experience along the way that is healing, warm hearted, connecting, soothing, anxiety reducing, at least offering you their compassionate presence. That's why that's so important, because transformation, it's a lifetime process. As I always say, and I'm not the one that came up with this idea, because it's obvious to everybody. You're done learning. You've arrived when you don't wake up anymore. But until then, if you're the same person now that you were 20 years ago, one might argue that you've wasted 20 years. And if you're the same person 20 years from now that you are today, one might argue that you've wasted 20 years. Transformation is slow, and we're so used to, and people are so eager and hungry for 6 steps and 7 steps and 12 steps and 3 steps and 4 principles and 5 skills, because we would love to read a book. We would love to have something that we could tape to our refrigerator door or to our bathroom mirror, and we would love to be that to be the sum total of our healing journey. It would be so much better. But again, the process is slow. The pace is slow. And along the way, the invitation is to keep going. But you don't have to do it alone. I'll go with you. So, all right, let's get into some pre-submitted questions. Somebody writes, what is your professional opinion about nature versus nurture? I don't think there's a good counter argument to my opinion. After I just talk about being curious and being a student and having a beginner's mind, I say that. But what I mean is, it's always both. There's always the given and the made, right? We all come with predispositions for gifts, for talents, for certain behaviors, for certain sensitivities from birth. Several traits, many traits. Some recent scientists have argued hundreds of traits are present. And then those present themselves to the environment, which starts off with with the primary caregiver, which is usually often a mother, sometimes a mother and a father, the family. And those traits are presented and how the family interacts with the child. Then the child starts to learn, the child starts to respond, the child starts to become conditioned, to become wired. So when I've heard people talk about, it's one of the I think the weaknesses, although I shouldn't say that too strongly because there's been so much progress in this idea of trauma informed therapy that most everybody now in mainstream self-help psychology is understanding that symptomology, mental health, addiction, it comes from, its root is found in trauma. So that's a good thing. But the limitation is not everybody's nervous system is wired the same. Some people's nervous systems are more sensitive, period. And if you have a sensitive nervous system, more so than another person, you're going to be more anxious. You're going to be at times more reactive. You're going to be more impulsive, use less forethought, planning, problem solving. You're more likely to have your brain hijacked, the fight or flight sensors in your lower brain taking over the rational thinking. So it's important that we always talk about both. And when anybody talks about one to 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 the exclusion of another in a large way, just understand that they've got some, they found some religion. They found something that they want to marry themselves to, and it just doesn't make sense. I really don't think, I can't even imagine an argument that says that it's one or the other. It's always both. And part of the job of a psychotherapist is to continually learn about the client. You come up with hypotheses, of course. You enter therapy with hypotheses, but the fact of the matter, it's something you do with the client, and it's a mutual discovery that you create together. Always learning about the client, always learning about who they are, how they react, how they see the world, and so forth. So I hope that helps. I hope that helps. Thank you. Somebody writes, next question. What books can you recommend for teens to help them discover how to be a self, as well as overcome generational attachment issues? In other words, is there a teen, young adult version of the audacity to be you? This is a great and difficult question at the same time. In fact, when I wrote The Journey of the Heroic Parent, one of the ideas that the author had was that there would be a version of it for children. And I explained to her, self-help isn't the language of children. Children don't process information in the same way. Children respond to stories. So, for example, in our program, we use the Knight in Rusty Armor. That would be the one that I would recommend. We've used the Tao of Pooh. We've used Way of the Peaceful Warrior. We use the Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl. That's a little bit more adult-centric, but some people really respond to it. I've used books like The Chosen or Dharma Punk, stories, memoirs of people who have gone through a process. That's really, children don't respond to instructive. And when I say children, remember, I'm talking about the adolescent brain, which is pre-25-ish, right? Before it's fully developed. That's not how children, in play therapy, one of the things you learn, which I was very, very slow to learn, a very poor student for much of my early career, that the reason that we do play therapy with students, with young people, with young clients, the reason that we use the Bodro, I hear people talk about all the time. What does camping have to do with psychotherapy? What does building a shelter and rubbing sticks together have to do with psychotherapy? And of course, the answer is it has everything to do with psychotherapy. Just like playing on a softball team does, right? It's that old Taoist idea that the way you do one thing, or it might be a Zen Buddhist idea, the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. So my answer would be, find a story that's compelling, that they're interested in, of somebody who's developed a sense of self, right? Who's gone through a heroic journey. Somebody who's transformed from the conditioned unconscious person that they were in the beginning of the story to somebody who knows themselves, who's singing the song of their soul. speaking their deepest truths. So that's what I would recommend. Some of those that I've used. I can't think of any others, but I'm sure that there are literally hundreds and thousands of great stories out there that don't describe or explain the hero's journey, but just show it. Just show it. Somebody writes, "What are your recommendations for building a secure mom-daughter attachment?" I can answer this question emphatically and clearly and simply. And the research is it's absolutely overwhelmingly consistent. The best thing that you can do for creating a healthy attachment with your child is to do your own work. Specifically, to look into your background and unravel and unwind your own childhood experiences. Small T traumas, big T traumas, everything in between. That is the excuse me, that is the great work. If you want a reference of a very scientific description of this, read Daniel Siegel's book that he co-authored with Mary Hartzell. Read Parenting from the Inside Out. That's essentially what the Journey of the Heroic Parent teaches also, my first book. So your work. It's your work. The relationship between a parent's awareness of their own early life experiences and their ability to provide a secure attachment is one of the strongest correlations we see in mental health. There's a great story, a famous story in Parenting from the Inside Out by Siegel and Hartzell, where they interview pregnant mothers, pregnant women, in a series of questions. And all the questions are about their own childhood. I believe they use Mary Ainsworth's adult attachment interview. I'm not sure of that. Haven't read it in a little while, but I think that's the instrument that they use. So they take those interviews, they score them, and then after the child that they were pregnant with, they bring the mother and the child back 2 years later. 2 years later. And they can predict, I believe the number is 83%. I'm off by 1 or 2%, maybe at the most. They can predict with an 83% confidence the quality and style of attachment based on the mother's pre-birth story, description, answer to questions about her own childhood. I could go on and on and on. I would tell you that it's the same with attachment-based therapy, the kind of therapy I've been describing during this broadcast, that the greatest predictor of a therapist's capacity to do it is how much work they've done themselves. Anne Lamott said the greatest gift that you can give to your children is your own work. And I could go on and on and on. That's it. That's why we do this. That's why I do these podcasts, is hopefully to give you a glimpse of the joy that comes, the strength, the liberation that comes from looking at yourself, looking critically. Not negatively. Critically doesn't mean negative, but looking at it with with a fine-tooth comb, so to speak, evaluating it, questioning your childhood. I'll end with this quote because it's probably my favorite quote about mental health in general. It's on the first page of Alice Miller's book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, which I say over and over again, I think is the most important book in my lifetime regarding child development. And on page 1, Dr. Miller says, "We have only one enduring weapon in our fight against mental illness, and that is the discovery of the unique emotional history of our childhood." That's the work. By the way, it's cross-cultural, it's cross socioeconomic status. It's studied in countries all over the world, in countries where they're not industrialized and modernized as much as the United States and North America and many other countries are. It's universally true, universally discovered and seen and described. Somebody says, "What is the weather? What is the weather like for the kids right now?" I haven't looked at the weather the last couple of days. It can be cold. It can be cold. There's small amounts of snow. We have tents that they move to if the weather gets a certain temperature. But the kids like to move and hike as much as possible. They actually stay. My experience is they stay warmer. The only time I think those tents are really, really useful, although we use them all the time, But really, really important is when the weather, when it's snowing or it's raining a lot, and we just need to get them dry with the wood burning stove. So it's cold, it's camping, it's primitive. That's the model. The model says that it's in the context of that struggle that all of these lessons, values, principles that you want to teach them are best taught. And then when we do too much kind of kind of top brain therapy stuff with them, when we do too much contrived experiences, it can kind of take away from that primitive model, that primitive teacher. So you have to work. You have to work. And we make sure that they stay dry and warm and that they have good gear, but you can't take anything for granted. That's what wilderness therapy, among the many lessons it teaches, that's maybe one of the ones that rises to the front, is you have to work at it. Whereas we can take for granted. I mean, part of our challenge in our modern society is that we go through life without being connected to our bodies, without being connected to ourselves. But wilderness therapy invites a kind of a mindfulness and a concentration and a focus. And the lessons about making a shelter. I remember, I haven't told this story in years. I was walking with a young man. This is pre-evoke. I was walking with a young man, and back in those early days in the mid 90s, we had what was called survival packs, where the kids would take all of their gear and their clothing, and they would put it in a blue tarp. They would wrap it up kind of like you would a package. They would tie it up with cordage like you would a package, and then they would use seatbelt webbing, and they would make we called a survival pack. They would make a backpack. And I remember one of my first weeks in wilderness therapy, I was hiking with the kids. At the time, I only had two kids. It was my first two students. And I remember one of them was vacillating between a discussion about how uncomfortable the hike was because he didn't put a lot of effort and energy into it, and he didn't want to be taught by the staff, and his backpack was lopsided and straining him as he walked. And he would vacillate between describing that and describing family life at home. And I remember thinking, that's the magic. It's the same. I could. It doesn't matter which content he's talking about. He's saying the same thing. It hurts. I don't want to do this. It's unpleasant. I don't want them to tell me what to do. I'll do it myself. I don't need help. Nobody cares. It was all the same thing. And I thought, I mean, that was week 2 in my career, and I was in love with the process. I was in love with the method, with the delivery method from those early days. But I don't have the weather right now. If Sarah, if you know what specifically what the temperature's like, you can post it if you'd like. Somebody writes, I have a young loved one who has expressed feelings of wanting to give up, not wanting to be here anymore, but is adamant that they are not suicidal and said they would not do that to their family. That is just a feeling that comes and goes. I don't understand, so I don't know how to support her. Would this be suicidal ideation? What are some things I can do to support her? I want to be clear. There's no guarantee in any direction. There are some people who act on suicidal ideation successfully that the folks around them had no idea. They couldn't see it. There are others that can be very blue, very depressed, self-harming, be almost obsessive with their suicidal thoughts, and never make a serious attempt in their life. And so I just want to say that there's no guarantee. But here's a couple of things from your question. I would try to relate. That's what I would do. I would try to relate. One of my favorite books that I read many years ago was written by my therapist, J.D. Gill, is called Finding Human. In fact, it's Finding Human is a very close title to Finding You, right? And she tells the story of Psyche and Aphrodite and Eros and that mythological tale. And I'll shorten it really short because I've told the story a few times. The story is about how Psyche was in love with Eros and wanted to be with Eros, Cupid, same person. His wanted to be with him, and Aphrodite didn't want that to happen at all. So Aphrodite said, to gain my Eros, my son's hand in love or marriage or to be with him, I'm going to give you 3 tasks. And she gave Psyche 3 nearly impossible tasks. Mind you, the word psyche is Greek for soul, right? It was a story about human behaviors, a story about all of us. So she gives Psyche these 3 tests, and one of them is she has to count individual grains of rice in this huge barn. Another one is she has to gather golden fleece from the rams in the field. And at every single trial, just before she got help from an unexpected helper, Aphrodite fantasized about suicide, wanted to give up. And that's a human thing. We want to go away. We want to hide. It's shame. It's the world would be better without me. Shame is about disappearing, about going away. So what I would do with this person, what I always do is I would relate and understand. After laying the groundwork for that, and I mean being patient. And it's a lot easier to do when you're their therapist than when you're their relative. They trust it a little bit more from the therapist. Not always, of course, but a little bit more. Part of what I invite them gently to do is just keep going. But you don't have to do it alone. It is painful. It is at times overwhelming. I understand the urge to check out. I've had similar, I've had, in fact, I'm just telling you this, I've had the exact same thoughts in my life for periods of time. And what I've learned is you're going through a process of you're going through a dark period in life, and there's a lesson, there's wisdom, there's something in that for you. That's what all of our myths and stories tell us. And it will be worth it, but in the meantime, I'll sit with you. I'll listen. I will try to understand. I won't try to fix, I won't try to correct it. I won't try to eradicate it. I'll just be with you. I have had a lot of success with that. And I'll share one last idea. It doesn't always work. It made a big impact on me. And I've seen it make a big impact on others. But one of the ideas about suicidal ideation at any level, and it's really just a continuum. So I wouldn't debate with them about whether it's real or not. It's on the continuum, which was said to me, and since it was said to me about 13 years ago, I've heard it in many other places. I was telling my therapist about a very similar feeling and urge that I was having back when I was going through some very difficult times in 2010 and 11. And she said to me that the suicidal impulse is correct. And I was shocked by that first. She said, but the mistake that suicidal people make is that they think they have to kill the whole self, when in reality, they have to kill part of themselves or a version of themselves. And when they do that, they can be free. And immediately, I had hope. Immediately, I realized the truth of it. I didn't have the answer. My depression didn't cease that instant. But I realized I can figure that out. And what that often means and what it meant for me is I have to kill the part of me that is overwhelmed by what other people think and feel. Because my nervous system is pretty sensitive. It's part of what predisposed me to be a therapist. But that same predisposition, that same gift that I have to offer other people is also a horrible curse. If I make decisions that are the right decisions and they hurt other people, I'm overwhelmed by that feeling. If I disappoint people, it's difficult for me. If I let people down, it's difficult. And in the process of growing, you have to be good at letting people down. You have to be good at disappointing people. We know that. Because you can't live an authentic life and not have the experience of upsetting or disappointing or letting somebody down, failing. I remember I had a therapist I was training, and he was just heaping praise on a young adult who had finished not only the assignments for the week, but went on like the good student that he was and finished several other assignments that would be forthcoming. And the therapist was heaping praise. And after the session, I said, be careful. Be careful, because what happens if he doesn't complete assignments? Will you be equally disappointed? And the kind of excitement and investment that you were showing towards his success implies that you would be. And the therapist assured me that I didn't have the context and didn't know this young man very well, and that he had done a good job. Coincidentally, I bumped into the father at a meeting that we were hosting in his local area in New York a few weeks later. And in conversation, the father said, I think the biggest problem my son has is that he's trying to make me proud, trying to live up to what he thinks my expectations are. And when he falls short, he feels horrible. And that's when he self medicates. So I knew it was true already, but to have the confirmation that this was a theme that even the father could see that clearly. So the point of it all is, um, the suicidal impulse is best understood psychologically is the fact that the individual has to kill a part of themselves and figure out what part of themselves, because in their perspective it's a lose-lose. If they're true to themselves, they'll hurt everybody else, and if they just meet other people's needs, they'll be miserable. And that's the stuck point for them. That's the dead end. And the only option is out. And as the story from Psyche and Aphrodite and Eros teaches us, it is a human impulse to want to hide, disappear, go away, for sure. All right, somebody says, will you speak more about solos? How does a solo differ from the other periods of time when my son is not engaged with the rest of his group? A solo is about 72 hours. We set it up. It's all designed by the therapist and approved by the therapist, where each of the clients, the students, is set in their own space. And while if they raise their voice and call to us, we can hear them and come to them in an emergency. We've never had a serious incident in 25 years of doing this work. 27 now years of doing this work. We've never had a serious medical issue on solos. But we have the provision that if they raise their voice and call their name, we'll come to their site immediately with a first aid kit, anytime, day or night. They're set out individually. They can't see or talk to anybody else. Even when the staff come and visit them to check on them several times throughout the day to make sure that they're safe, that they have the food, the water that they need, that they're awake, that they're within the space that is set out for them, because they're given a territory. On average, it might be 25 paces squared. It's a time to spend time with yourself and see how you like the company. It's like wilderness therapy, only more. It's what I say is it's the time that we turn up the volume of the noble silence of wilderness the loudest. If clients get the opportunity to do two while they're with us, oftentimes they'll have very different reactions and experiences with the two. Sometimes people who recharge when they're alone love the solo. Sometimes people who find that silence, I mean, comedians talk about this, right? The average adult, you pull up to a stoplight and you check your phone. We don't even like the silence of a few seconds at a stoplight. So it's practicing being present with yourself. And one of my favorite descriptions of an addiction, is a habitual attempt to not be present in your own life. It's the antidote to that. It's the antithesis of that. We don't like to give lots of assignments, lots of reading and writing assignments, because we want them to just be present with themselves. It's kind of an invitation toward meditation, toward mindfulness. Noble silence is what the Buddhists call it. And the processing of it afterwards is individual to every single client or student. We talk about what they loved, what they hated, what they did, what they didn't do. And you don't have to make value judgments about it. You're just letting them have an experience with themselves and see what that's like. How many of us could do for some time unplugged, silent, by ourselves, without distraction? How much more balanced would we be if we had a regular practice of that kind of thing? And that's what solos is. You're not interacting with anybody for around 72 hours, give or take. Somebody writes, do all parents, guardians go out for an in-person visit? Our philosophy is everybody is a candidate for that. Yes. Now there are exceptions to the rule, but those are in the minority. Anecdotally, I would say probably about 75% of clients have a visit from one or both parents, one or more parents. But it can vary, diagnosis, situation, age. Sometimes the older clients don't have a mid-program visit. We like to have parents present as much as possible, as often as possible. Not only do we think it's a great opportunity in a very safe, contained space to see the dynamics in real time and to do therapy in real time after each part of the family, each person in the family has had this time to kind of get grounded and clear about themselves and then coming together and experiment with that, see what it's like. We tell parents, don't come, please do not come for your visit looking for a good time. Come open to whatever presents itself. Some of my most valuable, richest, memorable experiences are visits from parents that did not go as planned or did not go well. But you get something from that. You see something from that. You learn something. There's grist for the mill, if you will. So that's the numbers. Looks like we might have a pause in the questions for just a bit. Okay. I'm gonna go through some upcoming events, and then if there are more questions, I'll pause before I finish the last slide. If you want to learn more about the work that I'm talking about and teaching about tonight, The Journey of the Heroic Parent and The Audacity to Be You are available on Amazon and Audible. I did the narration in The Audacity to Be You, not in The Journey of the Heroic Parent, although there's an audiobook available. We have new programming that we've developed. February 1st, there's one couples spot left. We're doing a multi-couples intensive. I thought when we started our intensive program, that would be the standard, but because I think it's such a rich process to have others in the group process. So we tried to do it a couple of times years ago. It didn't really fly, and now we're doing it. And I think people are understanding and feeling the work. Some of the folks that are attending have been to a Finding You also. So we have a multi couples intensives. We'll do another one later in the year. But there's one spot left for this next one on February 1st. On February 24th, I'm going to be doing a conscious parenting workshop. It's an all-day, 9:30 a.m. to 4:30 p.m. workshop Mountain Time with an hour break for lunch. This will be interactive. I'll be talking to you, so it won't be just me teaching and taking a couple questions. I'll actually have dialogues with you. So if you want a sense of what it's like to be in therapy with me, we keep it limited to no more than 24 folks, including 2 people on a screen. No more than 24 total. So if you want that experience, you want that interactive experience, you have the time. It's very affordable. February 24th, the Conscious Parenting Workshop will be my 3rd iteration of it. Loved my first 2. On January 23rd through 25th, we're going to be in the UK. This will be the 2nd time where we've done an intensive. So if you're listening to us over in the UK in London, it's outside in a beautiful, beautiful, beautiful mansion in the country. Finding You weekend in the UK. And then as it's just been announced, the date has just been announced, we have a master class on attachment-based therapy that I'll be teaching on May 26th. So if you want to attend, that's going to be an all-day class. Also, it's going to provide you with 6 continuing education credits, so you'll get credit for the day. Really looking forward to an interactive attachment-based to teach, like I've been talking about tonight, the method of attachment-based therapy, not about attachment styles, but what do you do? How do you do it? What gets in the way? I've been asked if lay folks can attend. I suppose so. I suppose anybody can attend, but I'm going to be speaking to people in the context of being therapists. But the application from therapist to client to parent to child to friend to friend. There's more in common with those relationships than there are differences at their core. Contact intensives at evoketherapy.com for these or any other of our programming. We have an in-person Finding You on February 22nd through 26th. January is full. I'll be doing that one later in the month. February now is open. We have a few spots left in the February one. March 22nd after that. And like I said, the online option on January 27th. We also have custom finding connection for couples and finding family sessions. So if you're interested in that, contact intensives at evoketherapy.com. We have support groups each week for current and alumni parents. So if you're a wilderness alumni or current parent, the next offering is January 12th at 6:30 p.m. Mountain Time. Is that right? We don't have one on the 5th this week? Did I make a mistake there, Sarah? Can you look that up? I know we have one on January 12th. Once a month, we have one for alumni only. So those are people with a little bit more experience, a little bit more time in the process. January 24th at 6:30 p.m. is the offering for that. Once a month, we have support groups online for intensives alumni. January 10th at 6 p.m. Mountain Time. You can contact intensives at evoketherapy.com to find out more, to register. You can go to our website also. What else we got? We have coaches, life coaches, personal coaches, one-on-one coaches, parent coaches, couples coaches. If you want an attachment-based trained coach, many of them are therapists. You can contact coaching at evoketherapy.com. It's been one of our most successful and expansive programs in the last year at Evoke. They can do it virtually. I think now that everybody's more comfortable with virtual work, now you're not limited by finding a coach just in your state. You can go across state lines. It's wonderful. We have pursuits trips that are 3 to 30-day private, customized trips for adults or families anywhere in the world. We've done them in Nepal, Dominican Republic, Canada, British Columbia, of course, many of them in Utah. We have a lot of great outdoor activities here. So think therapy light, think sober fun, reconnecting, recalibrating your therapy skills. We ask all current parents, please, please, please attend 6 of any of the following 12-step support groups: Al-Anon.org, Coda.org, FamiliesAnonymous.org, or AdultChildren.org. You can do them online virtually, which they've expanded that offering during the pandemic, and I believe they've kept most of it. And you can also, of course, attend in person. RefugeRecovery.org and NAMI.org are great organizations in your local communities that offer free classes and support. You can find all of these broadcasts on the podcast platforms on Spotify or any of your favorite podcast app. Just search Finding You and Evoke Therapy Podcast. We make them live the next day, so these broadcasts are turned into a podcast in 24 hours. You can also go to soundcloud.com on your computer and listen there, or you can go to YouTube to Evoke's YouTube channel and watch the broadcast there, where you can see the slides, see my face, see the questions. You can find Evoke Therapy Programs and me, Dr. Brad Reedy, on Twitter and Instagram using the handles at Evoke Therapy and at Dr. Brad Reedy. You can find Evoke Intensives on Instagram using the handle at Evoke Therapy Intensives. On Facebook, you can find us by searching Evoke Therapy Programs or Evoke Therapy Intensives, and we have new content on our blog continually. So check out our blog with new blogs from our staff and therapists. If you want to give back, the 3 charitable partners that we're partnered with are ChooseMentalHealth.org, Sky'sTheLimitFund.org, and the Evoke Family Foundation.org. If you want to give back, you can earmark your funds for Evoke if that means something to you, or you can just give to anybody who can't afford treatment or therapy. And that's my dog barking. My next broadcast will be this Thursday. I'll be talking about boundaries and choosing how to lose. One of my favorite topics. Boundaries. I could talk about boundaries every other broadcast, and I think each one of them would be different and unique because they're so nuanced, and there's nothing generic about boundary keeping and choosing how to lose. We do have a support group on the 5th. I did make a mistake. Our next offering will be on the 5th. If you didn't get the email invite, you can contact Sarah D, SARAD, at evoketherapy.com, or just you can do webinar at evoketherapy.com. Sarah also gets that. All right, folks. Oh, it looks like I have a question that came up before I close. I'll answer this question then close. If your husband doesn't like to talk about the past, would the couples therapy in a group be fruitful? Does couple therapy ever make the relationship worse? Oh, that's a really great question. I don't think that the couples finding you would be good if somebody doesn't want to share. I imagine that would be a bigger barrier for them to be in front of strangers. I will tell you, I have attended, I have facilitated private couples intensives where, on many occasions, it doesn't have to be this way, but the husband, it could be the wife, it could be a same sex couple, but many times the husband in a husband and wife relationship has said to us, to me, if I knew it was going to be like this, I would have come a long time ago. They expect to be ganged up on. I think men in our culture aren't as accustomed and comfortable talking about feelings and vulnerability. They don't have good experience with it. They really don't. It's not in their imagination. We were asking, we had a dinner question the other night that we were talking about as a family. And my daughter came up with it. And she said, if you were of the opposite sex, um, actually, we have a non-binary person in our family, so opposite sex doesn't quite make sense. But the question was, if you were this gender or that gender, what would be the greatest advantage? And when I answered the question, if I were a woman, I would appreciate that vulnerability and asking for help and showing emotion is received by others with less stigma than if you're a man. I'm not saying no stigma, but less. That's the one thing about a man is, especially some of the writers that I hear talk about masculinity and manhood in our culture, is that men are cut off. Men are lonely. 93% of prisoners are male in the United States. 93%. They only represent 49% of the population. A lot of them are black and brown and mostly poor, but 93% is a high number. Men are suffering. Men are struggling. They have the advantage and the privilege of the patriarchy, but that doesn't exclude them from suffering. So I don't. I would be loving. I would be compassionate. I'd be gentle. I would make the invitation. I would ask him if he's willing to come with you to something, and if he's willing to, then of course. But I wouldn't push. I wouldn't press. I wouldn't shame. I wouldn't coerce. I wouldn't threaten. I wouldn't manipulate, and I would assume that he has good reasons for his reluctance. I mean, that's the essence of an attachment-based approach. Is that your skepticism, your distrust of the process is well-founded somewhere. Somewhere it is. And it's our job to meet you there. Some of the greatest success that I've had as a psychotherapist in my career is when I've met somebody who distrusted me and my process, and I met them with patient without pushing. And over time, going back to the pace, over time, they open up and they trust the process. So, all right, folks, I think that's all for this evening. Great to be back after the break, after my week off. So glad to be back. Look forward to talking to you Thursday night, talking about boundaries and choosing how to lose. Thank you on behalf of the people that you love. Thank you for showing up and being willing to do your work. I hope this is a helpful point of contact. And until next time, take care of yourself. Talk to you in about 48 hours. Bye-bye.